If you've been around Chicago for any length of time, the name Mike Royko might ring a bell. Royko was an American newspaper columnist from Chicago, and over his 30-year career, over 7,500 columns were written on a daily basis for three newspapers: the Chicago Daily News, the Chicago Sun-Times, and the Chicago Tribune. He died in 1997, but he was a prolific writer, an amazing storyteller, and a cultural identifier who could say the things that most of us were thinking, but in ways that we maybe could never articulate. Years ago, he reported a true story in the Chicago Tribune. It seems that a man by the name of Bill Mallory had begun a quest to discover the purpose of life. And he traveled far and wide trying to find the answers to the purpose of life. In fact, somebody even told him that if you can't find it here, maybe if you go to India, go over there. Those people there maybe would have an understanding of that. And so he traveled to India, and he did not find the answer that he was looking for there. So after returning to the U.S., he noticed a sign at a Chevron gas station that said, "As you travel, ask us." And so every time he pulled into a Chevron gas station, he would pump his gas, then he would go into the station, he would look at the sign as he was going in, he would go to the station attendant behind the counter and he would say, "I'm a traveler." He would point to the sign, "I'm a traveler, I'd like to ask you a question." He would say then, "What is the purpose of life?" Well, as you can imagine, much of the answers were quite dumbfounding, Here are some true answers that were listed in the article. He got these real answers. Somebody said, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm new here." One other person answered, "Sir, I don't remember reading that in the manual." Another girl answered, "I'm not much for church myself, sir." One guy behind the counter gave him a leering look and a wink, whatever that meant. However, most people just kind of stared at him with a dead blank stare, and they took his money. One day, Mallory got a phone call from the Chevron Customer Relations Department, and the caller said, "Sir, we understand that you have been asking our dealers and our station attendants some questions and not getting satisfactory answers. Why don't you write out your question, put it in an envelope, send it to Chevron Corporate?" And so he did that very thing. He simply wrote, "Dear sirs, what is the purpose of life?" And he sent it to Chevron office. A couple weeks later, an envelope was returned to him with a large Chevron logo on the front, and the only thing in the envelope was an application for a credit card. What is the purpose of life? Does life have a purpose? You've asked those questions before, even if you've been a Christian for a really long time. I know I have. I've been a pastor, right? For over 30 years. I've spent the entirety of my adult life and my career as a leader and a communicator helping point people to the purpose of life. And yet, I've asked that question over the years of my life a lot as well. In fact, most of us do. We ask questions. We may not spend a whole lot of time thinking about our purpose, at least on a cosmic scale, but the times we do can be pretty troubling, especially if we suspect that there is no purpose. On the other hand, even for those who believe that our lives are heading somewhere, who believe that there is an ultimate meaning, finding answers to life's simple everyday questions can be very difficult.
I feel like for the longest time, my purpose was to convince people that I'm good enough, convince people that I'm really talented, convince people that they should like me, convince people that if they make fun of me, I will punch them.
I think American culture teaches us to make it happen. If you're going to be successful, you just got to make it happen. So it's all about the strength of your inertia moving forward or higher. I think that's exhausting.
We all wonder about our place in life. Maybe it's because we're different, or maybe it's because we feel like we're the exact same as everybody else.
I think that our world is becoming more and more complex, and our lives are becoming more and more accelerated. I think we're all trying to find as human beings, meaning in all of our technological devices and gadgets, how we spend our time. I mean, I'm amazed at how much time we Americans spend just watching television and screens. And this larger question, like, does this have any purpose? Like, what are we here for?
There was a famous little book, really short, called Here is New York by E.B. White, and he said, what makes New York, New York is three kinds of people. Number one, you get a person who's from New York. They are natives and they hardly even notice the city. You get locusts, that are people who basically live outside of the city to consume its resources. And then the last person is the person who moves here with personal ambition because they need a world stage for their perceived greatness to be realized. Los Angeles, for the most part, is about the veneer of beauty, but New York is about the pursuit of power. People reroute their longing for God and they just channel towards something else. They invest with holy religious zeal. The same things that Christians or religious people do into religion, they invest that into their careers or their relationships or their parenting or whatever else that is.
One of the most popular rock songs of all time is Mick Jagger's song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. And gosh, I really relate to that. For a long time, I just had this gnawing sense that if I could just discover the right thing, if I could just maybe get a better job or have enough financial blessing or find the right person that loved me or maybe even have the right kids with the right accolades so I could put the bumper sticker on the back of my car. And I did this great AC and then I'd feel satisfied.
The problem with answering is there purpose for our lives is that the question itself is driven by what I call utilitarian pragmatism, where we have to define everything and reduce it to a manageable piece before we can begin to play and explore. And as an artist, I don't do that. I start with a question and I leave it unanswered. So many times I don't have an answer for why I'm doing a particular piece of work or why I'm involved in a particular way of approaching my community or my marriage or lives of our children. But I'm comfortable with the mystery and the open-endedness of that question. So I often work backwards and I try to find that purpose at the end of the journey rather than at the beginning.
My son and I were working on a Pinewood Derby car over the last couple of months. We worked super hard, we sanded and cut the wood and painted it and polished the wheels, made the pinstripe, and you think about all the things that are wrapped up in that small little 20-hour project. Like here's the goal, here's where we're headed, here are the tools we need to do this, the bonding and the relationship and the apprenticeship from me to him to use the drill press and to use the different tools. Like this idea of like having something it brought us together in a way that was really cool. And when you think about like our larger purpose, you think about like how our lives are being lived, is it possible that we're like God? Like God's working with us to do some sort of project in the world, to do something good, to enjoy each other together during that process. It feels like, to understand even a small project like Pinewood Derby car, you get the idea that our lives were made for some sort of purpose.
I think we each have a role to play in the world, and a part of that role is that we're supposed to be here kind of fixing things that are broken. That part of our purpose is to participate with God who wants to see things that are wrong made right, that are injustice made just. And I think each of us have a unique story to play out within that. And a lot of it comes down to understanding our own story.
If we lay our life out, if we look at all the pieces of our lives, where we were born, the suffering that we've been through, the gifts that we have, the personality that we have, the places that God's led us now, the places that we work, the things we do with our free time. If you just lay all of that out, all of a sudden you start to look really unique. And I think that God wants us to see the pieces of our lives that He's given us that we have that are unique. And in that time and place, with our gifting, with our personality, use us.
No man knows his purpose until he knows the person who created him. I think people can't be fulfilled in what they're doing in life until they find the purpose that God has for them.
I have a friend in my life who I not so affectionately call my Bible friend. She was all the time giving me Bible verses, and honestly, it just it got on my nerves. I thought, how could one person have access to so many Bible verses? If I had a headache, she had a verse for that. But one day, she gave me this verse, and it was Jeremiah 29:11. It said, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And gosh, I remember reading that verse and thinking, I thought my whole life that I was a throwaway person, so this verse doesn't really apply to me, but I read it over and over and over, and something just deep down in my heart started stirring, and I read the verse again and just put my name in it. For I know the plans I have for you, Lisa, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe, even though I was a throwaway person to my real dad, maybe God looks at me a little bit differently. And maybe I should try this thought thing. I didn't know the right words to say, I didn't know what to do, so I just lifted my hands up and I just said, yes, yes. And I guess, not to make it over simple, but I've pretty much just been saying yes to God ever since. And I think ultimately that's my purpose.
When you felt that way too, maybe you even asked, was I just born to have a bunch of problems? Is it just me? Is there something that I'm doing wrong that's causing me to experience all these things? Because when I look at the person next to me or my best friend or the people on social media, it doesn't seem like anybody else is experiencing that very thing. Is it just me? Was I born on this planet just to have heartache and grief and stress and pain? Arthur Ashley Brilliant said this. He said, "My life is a superb cast, but I can't figure out the plot." Jack Hanley wrote, "I hope life isn't a joke, because I don't get it." A guy named Dr. Hugh Moorhead, who was the chairman of the Department of Philosophy at Northeastern University, once wrote to 250 of the well-known philosophers and scientists and writers and thinkers and intellectuals of the world, and he asked them that very question: what is the purpose of life? Many of them responded, and he compiled all their answers, and he put it in a book, and some of their answers really just were their best guesses. Some admitted that they made up a purpose in life. Others admitted they didn't have any idea what the purpose of life was, and so if Dr. Moorhead found out or somebody answered it, please write to them and tell them the answer. Russian-American writer and professor of biochemistry at Boston University, Isaac Asimov, wrote this: "As far as I can see, there is no purpose." An astrophysicist and Nobel Prize in Physics laureate Joseph Taylor wrote a book entitled this. Look at the screen. He wrote a book entitled, "I Have No Answers to the Meaning of Life, and I No Longer Want to Search for Any." Those are tragic statements, aren't they? I mean, those are kind of fatalistic statements because life without purpose is a life that's not worth living. And it's no coincidence that the suicide rate in our society has gone up. It's the number 2 killer of teenage students. You see, if you take God out of the equation of life and you really don't have any other alternatives. Oh, I know, you can look, you can be all mystical and you can look within. You can be a philosophical and opt to work it out just to stay alive. You can be a naturalist and think that there's no purpose in life except to perpetuate itself. Reminds me of the old rap artist Ice-T. Anybody remember that old name, Ice-T? Ice-T wrote this. He said, the only reason we're here is to reproduce. Just chill out and reproduce. Keep the species alive. Doesn't that motivate you to jump out of bed in the morning or maybe jump into bed, right? Just keep the species alive. Oh, you can be a hedonist and think that life is about pleasure, or a materialist and think that life is all about accumulating more things, but many people have searched all of those areas in life. Remember, this summer we preached through Ecclesiastes. We preached about Solomon, right? And we saw, as we studied the book of Ecclesiastes, that Solomon tried all of these things and so many more in greater and grander ways than you and I could ever dream up. And what did he say? It's not cutting it. We look for all of these things, but the purpose of our life, my friends, is more than just the fulfillment and happiness in our own life personally. You and I were made by God and made for God and put here for His purpose. Proverbs 16 and verse 4 says, the Lord has made everything for His purpose. Every rock, every plant, every animal, every person. Check your heart right now. Go ahead and check your pulse or check your heart. Is your heart still beating? Anybody here dead? Because you're not dead. If you were dead, you would be falling over and we would be calling the ambulance right now, right? If your heart is still beating, my friends, look up here. You have a purpose. You have a purpose for your life. And I want you to see this. You see, grab your programs. I want you to look at this next verse from the book of Ephesians in your program. I wrote it out. I wrote it out there for you because I wanted you to take this home. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 4. Look at your program. Look at the screen. It says this. Long before He laid down the earth's foundation, He had us in mind and settled on us as the focus of His love, to be made whole and to be made holy by His love. Would you take a pen and would you circle that focus of His love, the focus of His love on your program? Because this is what I want you to catch. God made you to love you. Write that down. You were created to be loved by God. And so if you're wondering, why am I alive? Why am I here? What's the purpose of my life? Why am I alive? I'll tell you why. He made you in order to love you. And that leads us into another question that so many people are asking relative to this idea of purpose in our life. The second key question of life is this question of significance. Does my life matter? Does it really matter? Isaiah, another Old Testament prophet, asked this same question a long time ago. Isaiah 49 and verse 4, he said this. He said, my work all seems so useless. I spent my strength for nothing and for no purpose at all. But friends, look up here. You were made for meaning. Your life does matter because God put us on this earth to prepare us for eternity. God has some extremely long-range plans in your life. Psalm 33 verse 11 says, His plans endure forever. His purposes last eternally. And He wants us to practice here what we're going to be doing in eternity for all time, forever and ever. Life on earth matters. Your life on earth matters. You are made for a purpose because we're going to be able to practice here what we're going to be able to do for all of eternity. You've probably heard me say this before, right? But we're going to spend far more time on the other side of life than we're going to spend here. Have you heard me say that before? I mean, maybe if you're lucky, 60, 70, 80, maybe 90 years on this side of eternity. But that's just a drop in the bucket. That's just a little blip on the screen when it comes to all of eternity. We were made for eternity, and life now is just preparation for it. And so, first of all, as to the question of existence, why am I alive? Well, God answers it by saying, I made you to love you. That's why you're alive. To the question of significance, does my life matter? God says, oh yeah, you matter. You're going to live for a long time. You matter so much to me that I'm going to keep you living for all eternity. Now, not living in the way that we're experiencing life now, but living spiritually for all eternity with a purpose to honor Him. But that brings us to a third question then, the big question of this sermon. The question of intention. What is my purpose then? What is my purpose? What on earth am I here for? Well, Christians are quick to answer that question as if everybody who hears the answer that they say are just going to accept it as face value. But we know that it's not always that simple, right? I mean, you person who you're talking to, a person without faith can ask you that question, and you can do your absolute best biblical answer, and they're going to say, yeah, okay, but what about? And they're just going to keep on asking questions. In fact, I got an email a couple of days ago from a person that I did not know. It seems that he was talking to a person from Westbrook, a gal from Westbrook. They were having a conversation, and the gal from Westbrook is a gal of faith, and she kept pointing him back to God, and he kept asking more questions, and she kept pointing him back to God, and he kept asking more questions, and finally she said, "You just need to talk to my pastor." And so he sent me an email, and he said, "I don't mean to be in any way diminishing of your faith and being a contrarian in your life, but I just have a lot of questions. Could we begin a dialogue?" And I said, yeah, we can begin a dialogue. I don't know how well I'm going to do in answering your questions, but I'll sure try. And so we began this conversation, and that's why we're starting off this year with this series, seeking to answer some of life's big questions, because here's the deal. A lot of people in this world are searching, and a lot of people are pretty troubled and pretty absorbed with this. And frankly, we as Christ followers need to have some semblance of an answer to give them when they want to know, what's life all about? What's my purpose? Why am I here? And so how do we answer that question? Helping point them the way to God. Well, let me try to help you by playing a little game. Can we play a little game? Is that okay? I've got some things up here on this table that I just want to point out to you. I'm sorry that you can't see them all when I hold them up because we don't have big iMag for the camera to zoom in. But let me first of all hold this big thing up. Does anybody know what this big thing is? It's a bolt cutter, right? Y'all know what a bolt cutter is? A bolt cutter does what? Cuts bolts. Thank you very much, all right? This is a big, heavy-duty one, man. It's like an industrial. I actually borrowed it from my brother-in-law, and I haven't returned it. And it's been quite helpful to have in my toolbox because I've had to cut a lot of bolts and I cut a lot of padlocks and so forth. But I think we probably all understand and know what a bolt cutter is. We probably know what that is. But let me show you a couple other examples of some things. And I had no idea what these tools were, so I had to find out. And then because I have a bad memory, I have a little cheat sheet, Does anybody know what this thing is right here? Some of you contractors, you might know, but others of you, you're like, what is that? Kind of hard to see maybe a little bit, right? This is a rivet gun, okay? So what you do is you take something like this. You may or may not know what this is. This is a metal stud hole punch. I had to ask her to write it down, right? To bind the top track and studs together when you're hanging steel studs. And so you can take something like this and punch a hole, and you can take something like this and you can put a rivet in it, like this track that we have behind here that's held together with these rivets, right? Or maybe if you're really a contractor, you may know what this thing is. Can you kind of recognize this and see this? A little hard to see again, I understand that. But this is a circle cutter. It's adjustable to cut circles in drywall or acoustical ceilings. And so if you go out into our lobby, that drop ceiling that's there, and you see the kind of the hanging lights, it's a perfect circle to drop those lights in. And I wondered, how in the world do they do that? How do they cut that circle so perfectly? What's something like this? All right? Here's another one. Y'all, I don't know if you can see this or not. This is kind of hard to see too. But can you kind of tell what this thing is? Anybody have an idea what this thing is? Okay. This is a dental extraction puller for molars. Okay? So anybody need to leave here because this is kind of freaking you out right now? So if you know what this is and how the dentist uses it, but let me just say, please beg your dentist not to confuse this with this, right? You wouldn't want that to happen, would you? No, we wouldn't want that to happen. Here's my point. Here's my point, all right? My point is this. If you don't know something's purpose, it's likely to be abused, right? You want to know why there are so many people who are confused today about life? Because they don't know their purpose. And the first point of this little game is that you need to understand the purpose. Secondly, the only way you're going to know and understand the purpose and how to utilize things is either you talk to the creator, you talk to the inventor, or you talk to somebody who is quite knowledgeable of what this tool is all about and how it's to be used. Do you get the point? The only way you're going to ever know your purpose in life is not by listening to philosophers, because even the best ones are probably just guessing. It's not from looking within. Because even some of those people, can point you to look within, but you're not going to find it there. It's not going to be in self-help books, because they're going to say, just create a purpose and write about it and figure it out yourself. It certainly won't be found by watching television or watching movies or surfing the internet. What do? You got to talk with the creator and maybe even look in the owner's manual. Look in the owner's manual. That's why Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. You want to understand the meaning of life, the purpose of life. Write this down, will you? You find your purpose in getting to know God. It all starts with God. And so 2 more verses to get down, right? Colossians 1:16, for everything, absolutely everything, above and below, visible and invisible, everything got started in Him and finds its purpose in Him. Ephesians 1:11 says, it's in Christ that we find out who we are and what we're living for. Part of the overall purpose He is working out in everything and everyone. If you want to know your purpose in life and what matters in life and what life is all about, start getting to know God more and more and more. Because here's the bottom line. Every person on earth, everyone on earth was created to know God and to love God personally. Everyone was made that God might love them. And that takeaway is so incredibly valuable, my friends. It's so valuable for every one of us in this room today. Whether you're Christian, you may need to be reminded of this. And those of you who maybe are far from God and you're figuring this out, maybe you were even drugged here by a friend today or a loved one because they well, just go and let the pastor answer your questions. Okay? Because so many people are searching. And so as we kick off this new year, 2019, my friends, let's do so with a foundational check of what we're all about, with a foundational review of what's really all important, and with a foundational appraisal that will serve to make this year so impacting. My friends, you can rest assured that you're going to have ups and downs. That's not going to go away. And I'm sorry to tell you that as we begin the new year. It's all just part of life. It's all part of life. But starting with the truth and being reminded of that truth, purpose, there's no better way to live this life. And so if you want to know the purpose of life, you're not going to find it at a gas station. You're not going to find it on a talk show. You're not going to find it in a self-help book. You're not going to find it in a Tony Robbins seminar. If you want to know the purpose of life, you either have to talk to the Creator who made you or look in the owner's manual to make sure that you're doing it right. And the reality is, this owner's manual tells us that we were created by God to love God and to be loved by God. And when we start with that, life begins to make sense. Heavenly Father, I thank you that there's a starting point. And I realize that for many people that just begs more questions. And the amazing thing about you and the amazing thing about a life with you is that you're okay. You're really okay with all of our questions. And so, God, as this question leads to another question, which leads to another question, may we not be cavalier with our answers, but may we just be faithful to journey with people, helping point them to the one who maybe has all the answers. The one that can create significance, the one that can help put things together, the one who helps us understand what life is all about, realizing that this life will one day be over, and that which we've practiced here on earth we're going to be able to do for all eternity. Thank you that we were made by you, God, for you, God, to be loved by you, and that our purpose is to walk in you. Help us to get to know you more and more and more. In your name.